And we, again, have had a very interactive group over these last 3 sessions. Hopefully that will continue. We have a very large group, so having breakout sessions really isn't feasible in this mode of the webinar. But as we will talk about in a little bit, we're going to have a learning community where we'll be able to have more breakout sessions, more practice opportunities. We'll talk a little bit more about the learning community as people are joining the call, so everyone gets a chance to hear that. Just as an FYI, we did speak with the folks at the Washington Healthcare Authority, DBHR. They will be handing out the slides and the link to the recording of this webinar, as well as the previous 3 webinars, if you haven't already received those. So please keep a lookout for those. And if you don't receive them, please give Ken or me an email, and we'll reach out to our contacts there in Washington. I don't know if there's anyone from our team on the call today from Washington. If so, please jump in with any information you would like to provide. Just to let you know, you can use the chat. It should be working. It looks like it is with all of the introductions we're seeing. And raise your hand if you would like to speak. We can unmute your mic and we'll be able to hear from people. So why don't we get started? Ken will get started in this beginning half.
Yeah. So just to kind of reorient you to where we are now, this is the 4th of 4 training sessions. You may recall that we've been talking about motivational interviewing. We started out in the first one about the spirit of motivational interviewing, and then as we got into session 2, we started to talk about change and sustained talk and how you're trying to elicit change talk and let the sustained talk sort of go by, but also pay attention to where it's coming from. In session 3, we talked in more detail about ORs, which we'd started in the previous session, but particularly complex reflections, which I think are the toughest part of this to teach and go through. And then the summaries as well. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about stages of change, which is not motivational interviewing, but they work very well together. And one of the things that I like about teaching them in tandem is most of the interventions that I've ever learned are geared toward people who are ready to take action. And unfortunately, the majority of the people that I've ever worked with, and I think the research says about 80%, aren't ready to change. So we have all these interventions for a stage that someone isn't yet. So then what we do is we kind of act as if they are ready to change, and they may not be. So this is more about how you sort of set the stage and get people, moving. So as we talked about last time, we talked a lot about complex reflections. So you're showing the person that you heard what they said, but you're also what I like to call hypothesis testing. If there's something that you think is going on behind the scenes, you get to add that in there. And then the person, again, wanting you to get it, will correct you if you're wrong and if you're right. And I love when you nail one when you're right. There's usually a couple seconds of silence. And that's good. They're thinking about it. And they're like, well, wait a minute. So that's really helpful. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're so difficult to get, and one of the reasons that they are so beneficial when they are good. And you all did a great example of picking some of these out when we did it before. Also, summaries. A summary is a wonderful way to end a session. In fact, very often a summary is usually referred to as just a big extended reflection. You're just reflecting on the whole session. But you can also use summaries to take the topic in a new direction. You can take it to end, and you can also connect it with something that someone said before. So not only were you listening this particular session, but you were listening in the previous sessions as well. And that's a very powerful tool. And just one more piece about the structure, what we're doing. I think Joni mentioned it already, but we've picked up some people since then. So again, this is the last of the 4 of these webinar sessions. However, we are going to be doing the learning community. We'll be starting on the 4th Tuesday of each month, starting January 25th. You'll get notice about that. It's the same time, right? It's 9 to 10 Pacific Standard. So we'll be moving to Tuesday, but otherwise keeping the same time. And we're going to do it those 6 months from January 25th to June 25th. And the benefit of that is Um, you'll get a chance to go out and try some of the stuff that you've picked up here. And to me, the most valuable time in learning is when you've gone out and tried to use something, maybe hit some barriers, or you're not sure if this is working or if you're doing it the right way. And then we get to discuss it, in real time. And of course, you'll get feedback from some of your colleagues as well, which is helpful. So that's the structure that we're using going forward. Now, as far as the activity, one of the things that we asked you in a previous session to do was to do a practice run somewhere. And you could do this practice run with someone that you're working with professionally, one of your colleagues, or even just someone in your family, someone that you know personally. And basically, that assignment was, instead of doing what you would normally do, just make it about ORs, the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. So that you can get familiar with how to use these tools, how to alternate them, how to combine them, and seeing where they work and maybe where there are some challenges. So I was wondering if anybody had had that experience, if anybody had gotten a chance to try it out either with a client, with a colleague, or someone that they know personally, and how that went. And we can either unmute you and you can tell us, or you can put some comments in it in the chat. And I think the thing that I'm looking for is, did changing what you do in the conversation change how the conversation went? Did you get something that you wouldn't have gotten, doing what you were doing previously?
You can also unmute, raise your hand, and we can unmute your mic. But so far we have a couple people in the chat saying, I have a friend that called me for support.
Mm-hmm.
And someone else, I've been trying more with my clients and I think I've seen improvement. And interesting. And Allison or Gail, I don't know if either of you would want to kind of elaborate on some of the questions here on the slide. What was the overall experience like practicing the skills? How did you feel during the conversation? What were some of the challenges? And how did the person you were meeting with respond? Let's see. Karen also mentions here in the chat, my client said, you get thank you, you understand, you get it, thank you, you understand. So it sounds like, Karen, you got some positive reactions from a person that you were meeting with, and they really got that you were trying to understand what they were telling you.
That was my wife's reaction. My test, my trial run was with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And the two things that she said, she definitely said thank you, that she felt like I understood the situation better. She also said that she liked that I wasn't making suggestions and trying to fix. I was just hearing her all the way to the end and asking questions. Wasn't judgmental. I wasn't giving advice, because when you're in distress about something, the last thing you want is that other person either trying to direct you or judging what you did. It was a lot more impactful than I thought it was. I was just trying it out, just because they told us to and all that, but it definitely had more of an impact. Oh yeah.
Gail said, I felt like I was wading into deep water and practicing. And I think that brings up a good point. Ken and I have facilitated these 4 90-minute each webinars, which will certainly give you some good information and some knowledge. However, having those 6 months beyond today, practicing, I think, Gail, will hopefully address some of that sentiment that you're suggesting. Kind of felt like you're wading into deep water, and maybe having more support and kind of having the learning community to deepen that practice and those skills might be really helpful. So please,
Some great
try to
feedback on there.
join.
Some great feedback on there. Sabrina, I can relate. My wife knew what I was doing in the first 5 minutes. She knew what I was.
Yes.
She was like, "This is the stuff you learned." I was down in Miami, and she was like, "This is that stuff you learned in Miami, isn't it?" I was like, "You know me too well. I can't cover it up." But she went along with it. It still worked out okay. I definitely
Allison.
hear what Carly said about not going into fix-it mode. That is brutally hard to do.
Yeah. Allison followed up her comment with, my clients have been very positive when I've been repeating things back to them, and it gets me useful information. They open up more when they know you're listening. Absolutely. Lise says, has a lady veteran who lost her father. Open-ended questions allow her to share and process her grief and just talk. Yes.
Great feedback, because the I think
Yes.
that's that might be the best type of example of when you don't want to direct and you don't want to jump in. Grief is such an individual
Hmm.
process. You don't want to get in the way. If that person's doing what they need to do, you just want to keep them going. That's that whole evoking thing.
Yeah. So, Gail, some of the obstacles,
Hmm.
friend has a traumatic brain injury that gets in the way of her progress. And that may, when Ken and I facilitate the learning communities, we can get into some of the more complex issues that might prevent, pre present some challenges or obstacles.
The motivational interviewing textbook, which there's a pretty new version of it out, I think the third edition, they talk about special populations and how you adjust this. Because how you would do this with maybe an adolescent would be different with people with traumatic brain injury, different with someone with cognitive deficits, all that kind of stuff. So there are little kind of maneuvers and moves that you can make.
Well, I think maybe we should move on, but
Mhm.
thank you for everyone
Yeah,
who
great
tried
feedback.
it out. And again, we'll have more opportunity to practice and process that practice in the next 6 months.
And if you did have a challenge, if you tried it and it didn't work, or you got right to that moment and stopped, um, keep that, bring that to our when we meet. Let's talk about actual examples and actual places where you had difficulties, because that's exactly the kind of thing we want to cover. It'll be a little
Exactly.
less slide and didactic, but it'll be much more, how do we make this work where you are with the people that you serve.
Yeah, Allison, just one final chat. One obstacle I get a lot is when I ask open-ended questions, it's easy to fall into the I don't know cycle. Yeah,
Yes, yeah, I think someone brought that up in one of the earlier sessions. A lot of clients aren't used to being asked what they think. So they automatically rely on you. What should I do? What should I do? Again, I work on the state hospital side. So people are very disempowered there. So this is hard to get that. The staff are used to being in charge, and the patients are used to being, I hate to say subservient, but they're on the wrong side of the power differential. So there's a lot of, well, maybe what I think doesn't matter, or they're just not used to thinking that way. And that requires a major shift. Maybe somewhere where you work have similar circumstances. So here's what we're up to today. We're going to talk about the continuum of change, and because that's what we changes our business. This is what we do. Um, I mentioned before, the stages of change, also called the trans theoretical model, partners up very well with motivational interviewing. So much so that I think they get mentioned in the same breath a lot, and they're not the same, but they work hand in glove particularly well. In fact, to me, the stages of change to me is where I start with to determine how appropriate motivational interviewing is going to be. If someone's ready to move and ready to go, I don't need to do as much of that stuff. But where I see ambivalence, that's like, okay, let's put some time in. Let's use some of these techniques, because maybe we're talking about somebody in some of the earlier stages that we're talking about. We're also going to talk about how you can support someone in each stage of change, because each stage has specific interventions. And I like to refer to this process as uh, diagnosing change. I almost care more about what stage of change someone is in than their diagnosis in terms of their motivation and what I should do. So again, I don't know how familiar you are with these, and we have videos that go into this in a lot more detail. There's also a great book called Changing for Good that goes into this in great detail. And I saw somebody asked before about motivational interviewing, the third edition. I think it's a purple book. I'll grab it later. I got it behind me somewhere. If you want to follow up on this, I think those two books are a great place to start. So let's talk about the continuum of change. And the continuum of change, I don't want to overstate continuum. I'm sure you all are familiar with the stages of grief, both personally and professionally. They're not discrete. You kind of go from one into another and you move forward and you move back. So it's not like necessarily going up a flight of stairs. And you may have elements of two different stages at the same time. So it's not discrete and it's not linear, but it's a good way to kind of locate where someone is. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So this was started out in the 70s as an attempt to address smoking. And those of you who go back that far, do you remember when everybody smoked? Did you ever go into school to get a teacher in the teacher's lounge, and if you opened the door, this big wall came out at you? And of course, restaurants and stuff like that back in the day. So that's where it started. It really started working with in around health issues and also addictions. So let's take a look at this. So pre-contemplation is usually referred to as the first stage. And pre-contemplation, if I was going to summarize it in one line, I would say, I don't have a problem. You know, in our case, if there's somebody in a state psychiatric hospital and they say, well, I don't have a problem, the police need to leave me alone. Okay. So they don't have a problem. Someone else has the problem that they're somehow being inconvenienced by. And that's very difficult to start out with. And again, where I work, there's a lot of people in that stage. You know, they're being committed against their will. So that's kind of where people start: pre-awareness of a problem or actively resisting acknowledging that problem. Then the next stage is contemplation. Smoking in hospitals, yes. Contemplation, if you think about the scales, like the scales of justice, you know, here are the reasons for making the change, here are the reason for staying the same. I jokingly refer to this stage as the butt stage, one T and butt, because people put but right in the middle of the sentence. They'll say, well, I want to eat healthier, but organic food is really expensive. I'd like to quit smoking, but I have a very stressful job. In fact, you can kind of hear all these. You can hear the bits of a double-sided reflection right in there already. The person's giving you the reason to change and the reason to stay the same. And of course, in MI, you would try to lean into, you want to know what's keeping them staying the same, but you really want to pursue what their motivation is to change. People can be in this stage for years, just stuck. The next stage, and this is the one that we probably miss the most, and this is the preparation stage. Um, Most of us are very psyched to move people along in the change process. In fact, I always call it cheerleaders for change, and I hate that. And it's me. I totally get caught up in that. You could see the benefits if they do what they need to do, and you know, it's hard not to go there. Just like the writing reflex that was being talked about before. Um, so this is usually where we kind of mess up and say, okay, they're in preparation. That means they're in action, and let's go. And here it's actually almost want to pump the brakes a little bit and say, you know what, let's work on a plan. Before we build this house, let's have a good blueprint first. And let's try to anticipate the things that might defeat this change process. Presumably someone's tried before. What are the things, even if you just made a list of things why it hasn't happened already, um, you know, that's a good start. If this, my favorite question, and this comes from working in the ERs too long, was if this were going to fail, how would it fail? People know the answer to that question, and your change plan has to address that question because they're probably right. If it's going to fail, that is how it's going to fail. So then the action stage. The action stage is when it actually happens. That first day at the gym, the first day not smoking, the first day on the diet, whatever that thing is, day one. Sometimes day one is really good because you're starting out with a head full of steam. You know, you're ready to take on that cottage cheese and pineapple diet. You're all ready to go. Then you get around to day three, and some of the honeymoon's over at that point. Lots of changes that don't get planned very well don't make it past action stage. They just get there in the beginning. And you may have had this experience yourself in your own life. If you have undergone many, many, many different change initiatives to get to the same goal, this is part of that cycle. Maintenance is when you've done the change for a while and it's getting easier. The book tells you 6 months. And I go, I've seen some evidence to back that up, and I've seen some that doesn't. I think how long this behavior has been going on influences that. So I don't think it's that neat and clean. You know, again, if I was going to use the example of grief, how long does it take to get past grief? With some people, they're okay under a month. With other times, it could be a lot longer. And then the last stage here is what they used to call relapse, and now they're referring a lot more to recycle. We're trying to normalize the idea that people don't just make a change once. Think about a major change that you've made in your own life. Did you just wake up one Monday morning and do it? Or was there years of thinking about it, maybe a couple attempts. Maybe you got to, the example of smoking, I always think the research says people who are quitting smoking, it usually takes 4 to 5 attempts. So you don't just quit smoking for the rest of your life. You do it for a certain period of time, and then a trigger or something shows up, and then it happens. And then either the person quits the change process, which is what we're trying to avoid, or they say, okay, I need to address something in this change process. I can't work here anymore because everybody's smoking, or I have to take better care of myself because I use smoking as a stress reliever. You know, so when you see these, sometimes you see them as a spiral that they go around, but then the end doesn't continue. The idea is you spiral up and out of um, this same behavior. So what I'm hoping is, while I was talking about all this, I hope little lights were going off for you about, oh, that's where I am with this. This is where I am with that. I'm in the middle of this one. Like, I'm gonna do it, but I don't know when, or something else has to happen first. And oh, absolutely, Lisa, you nailed it. In our department, we have something that we call failing forward, and the idea is that failure, it's not an undesirable outcome. It's part of the process. When you were a little kid, somebody threw you a ball, and chances are that ball hit you and then hit the ground, and you looked at the ball in an accusing manner because it attacked you. And then after a couple times, then you, oh, all right, wait a minute, I got to get the hands involved in this. I got to catch this. I've got to do all this stuff. And by the virtue of being unsuccessful, you learned how to succeed. And that's usually how it goes. Not too many people get it the first time. So I think that's a big piece of it. And just like you said, what we're trying to do is just keep them in the process. Keep them in the process. Just don't abandon it. Tweak the plan. That's the nice part about the blueprint. You can blame the blueprint and you can fix the blueprint instead of the heck with it. I'm just starting over again.
So think about your own change process that we talked about earlier. In previous trainings, if you attended 1 through 3, um, think, where would you say you are in the change continuum, and why? You know, what does that look like for you? So think about the change that we talked about in previous sessions, or even if you haven't attended the previous sessions, think about a change that you're considering or have considered. Where would you say you are in this continuum of change? Yes, Lindsay, just following up. Can't have success without failure. This is something I say almost daily. Absolutely. Allison, contemplation for sure. And hopefully, as Ken described, contemplation, you could kind of see where that, what it looks like in your change process. Preparation, we have contemplation, action, contemplation, end recycle, action. Stephanie, with exercise in between preparation and action, sometimes going back to contemplation when injured, contemplation. And Ken, that's kind of an interesting point too. Maybe you want to highlight how, going from one part of the continuum to another is very common. And we want
Yeah.
to be looking out for that too. And I think thank you for putting that in there. Some of the scenarios we're going to review and some of what we'll discuss, we'll talk about how to recognize when someone might be kind of in between stages or falling back into a previous stage.
Well, that's one of the neat parts about the Changing for Good book is that it's actually kind of designed like a self-help book. So you can go through it and you could say, all right, if I'm going to clean out the garage. I've been talking about cleaning out the garage for 10 years and I haven't done it. And you can find out what stage you're in, and then not only what stage you're in, but what's the next obstacle? What's the next, like each stage has tasks in it, and where are you at regarding that task? So that helps you move forward as well. And then it also has a list of interventions for that particular stage. So that's one of the reasons I like it, because you can read this book and use it on yourself. I mean, I think that's a good place to start testing something out. If it
Mhm.
works for you, work for somebody else.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have your own experience to draw from when you have somebody else go through it as well.
Oh, the author for Changing for Good is
Totally.
Prochaska, Norcross, and DiClemente. And
Yep, it's
then
a,
the new Motivational Interviewing is the third edition, Miller and Rolnick. I think we have these listed in our references or
I'm pretty sure
resources.
they are. I
Yes.
just
So,
wanted to toss them there in case
yes,
somebody
thank
wanted
you.
to get them. And the third edition of motivational interviewing is a definite improvement over the second. Second one's been out for a long time. I think as they do it more and more and more, it becomes polished and smoother and a little easier,
Mhm.
you know. But great, absolute great books. Two of the most important books for me in my, in doing what I do.
So, as you saw from your responses in the chat or your reflection on your own change process, it's not linear. We saw people in the chat kind of in between two, or in the recycle stage. So, as we kind of go through each of these little video continuum of change videos, think about your own change, or even think about individuals you're working with. We're going to really kind of talk about each of those. So while aspects of the continuum of change may be easy to understand conceptually, they can be a bit more complicated to identify in conversation with the person making the change. So we were hoping to illustrate each aspect a little bit more by listening to and watching a few brief video clips of what someone may sound like when they're in these different places along the continuum of change.
There's one neat pre-contemplation. I've also heard it referred to as anti-contemplation. I don't even want to
Okay.
hear about it. If one of my issues, and we'll touch on this one later in one of the vignettes. So if I'm concerned about having diabetes, but I don't
Mhm.
want to take any action about it, this means I don't even want to hear about it. I don't want to talk to my doctor about it. I don't want to watch a TV show about it. Like I just immediately push it away because I don't want to deal with it. So pre-contemplation, even though it's called pre, as in before contemplation, it's almost more of an anti, like the um, what's normally called resistance, we kind of call more ambivalence here. It's there right up the front. I don't even want to hear about this because it's just going to cause me more stress, in my life.
So we're going to play a series of videos and have a discussion after each. But as I play the video, think about, what did you hear that person say that clues you in that they're in pre-contemplation? What are examples from your own work of things that people have said that suggest they're in pre-contemplation? So as we're reading the video, think about, or as we're watching the video, think about, what are you hearing that clues you in that the person is in pre-contemplation? So Ken, just give me a thumbs up as it, make sure it's playing properly. And
So I know you really care about me and you think I haven't been acting very well lately, but I'm fine. I just have not been able to sleep lately because my neighbors have been very loud and they're keeping me awake. I don't need to take my medication. What I need to do is to move out of this apartment, get away from my neighbors so that I can get some sleep, that everything will be fine. I blame this all on them.
So what did you see or hear there that kind of indicated to you, okay, this person isn't exactly the point of ownership of having a problem? Right. It's always somebody else's. I'd be fine if they just stopped doing
mhm.
whatever. And I'm guessing that you probably, I mean, throughout the system where we usually see this the most is around medication adherence, or even just participation in treatment, I'm sure.
So I'm looking at finding someone else to blame, blaming of others, excuses, deflecting. She knows the other party is worried. She's making a plan, even if it's not quite the exact solution. Blame, I'm fine. It's just that. Uh, don't want others to worry. What are some examples from your own work, that things that people have said that suggest they might be in pre-contemplation? Lori, from the video, if I move, I'll be fine. If they quit being noisy so I can sleep, deflection, blaming others. So think about your own work and individuals that you're working with or have worked with. What are some examples of what people have said? Blame others. It's not that big of a deal. I know. Focus on barriers. Threatening to leave their housing, like in the video.
And this person may have changed housing a bunch of times already for the same or similar
Mhm.
reasons. So you could be sitting here like, I know that's not going to work, coming right out of the gate.
I can't do the program if it's going to be this way. Acknowledgement of a problem, typically finding who else is at fault rather than how they might be able to adjust or fix their own solution. I'm fine. I just took all my medications at once to help me sleep. If I stay away from people, I won't be tempted to do drugs. Always finding a reason they are not the issue or need to change, deflecting.
Yeah, I think addictions is probably another area where you see this.
I have a client with
like
severe anxiety who
7
says,
Mhm.
yeah, who says coping skills don't work for me. I've already tried or done that.
I already tried coping skills, all of them. Yeah. Yeah, I think in addictions this is pretty common because it's really hard for that person to kind of own up that it is the problem it is with them. It's much easier to put it off on other people.
I don't trust the doctors when wanting to stop medication. I need a ride to work, so I have to get a ride with this person regardless of their addiction status.
Mm-hmm. Yep, those are all good.
So why do you think it's important for us to pay attention to kind of the stage where someone's at, what they're saying that might suggest they're in a certain stage of change? Why might that be important for us as practitioners to recognize? And I'm thinking about what you just mentioned, hearing from individuals in pre-contemplation. Nicole, it's important because it shows readiness for change, acceptance. What I see a lot of is it appears that they're afraid of change and these barriers become protection. And if you try to remove barriers, they start to panic. So paying attention to what's kind of the underlying message, perhaps. So
Right.
we do not rush ahead of them. Yes, intervention before bigger problems arise and they're harder to deal with or wrangle with. So we can meet them where they're at because we're walking beside them, not leading them where they want to go, to be able to tailor the technique to meet them where they're actually at and to adjust our tactics to meet them where they're at. Excellent.
Absolutely. That's one of the central tenets of motivational interviewing is it's one of the reasons they duck away from the word resistance because they say we really create resistance. We create resistance by taking someone where they're not ready to go
Yeah.
instead of staying where they are. And that's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do because, of course, if somebody's using drugs or doing something that's, imminently harmful to themselves, it's hard not to go there. But it's just not going to work.
Allison mentioned here in the chat, I like to say, maybe we could bookmark this and circle back to it when you're ready, reminding them that they set the pace often helps them feel safer.
Absolutely.
For me, when I encounter stuckness in a client, I also start to feel stuck. Having awareness of it is helpful. Supporting them effectively, afraid of a new change due to change is hard, used to old habits, afraid of the unknown.
Yep. Because and I think Allison really nailed a great point in that, okay, right now it's probably been brought up because we brought it up. What happens if we do other stuff and that person brings it up or brings it around again? Then they've initiated it instead of, because we were saying this with even people, if you do these techniques with someone for a long time, they know what you're going to say. They know, we have like our set rap. They heard it from somebody else before us. They're going to hear it from somebody after us. So this changes it up. So it's not just, oh yeah, they're going to tell me to take meds, stop using drugs and, all that stuff. We are kind of predictable that way. Because that's our job. It's what we're supposed to be doing. And the fixing thing is it as well.
So let's look at contemplation. And again, what are you hearing that clues you in that this person is in contemplation?
Your brain lights up like a TV when you're playing video games. So check this out. Researchers from the University of California found that certain areas of the
Love the ads.
I know I said that I was thinking about getting my driver's license, but the other day I was thinking about it and started to feel a panic attack coming on. I just get really nervous about getting behind the wheel again, even though I know that driving is going to help me get a job. I really do want a job. I could get my own apartment, I could feel more independent, but I bet my insurance is going to cost a lot because of that accident. And I'm not really sure if my credit is good enough to get a car.
Mm. So what did you hear there? What did you hear there that kind of tips you off that you a lot of butts going on there? Yeah.
But
That's probably my favorite way of telling that it's contemplation. Pros and cons. Right. You can actually hear a pro and con list being made, on the fly. And of course, one of the interventions is let's keep that running. Let's make a really big and thorough pro and con list.
yeah.
Yeah.
How about people that you've worked with or are working with? What are some things that you've heard people say that show they might be in contemplation? I know most of my work is around supported employment, supported education. So a lot of times I might hear people say things like, I want to get a job, but I'm afraid of losing my benefits. I want to get a job, but I'm afraid I won't have time to socialize with my friends who may be working different hours or may not be currently working. Need to versus can't do, ambivalence. They will ask for your opinion, but still respond with the, I think it cut off a little bit. Oh, with the buts. Yep.
Yeah,
It's
you
never
can
been like
go
this
back and
before.
forth from one side to the other. Why I should, why I
Mhm.
should, why I should. And it's real easy to stay in that loop for years. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you try to write it down is see where are all of these. And then the other thing I like doing, and this is on there's a pro and con list sheet that we have that goes along with this, where it's kind of a 2x2. So it's reasons to change, reasons to stay the same.
Mhm.
And the neat part about it is a person may only have one reason to not change, but that one takes priority over everything else. They can think of 100 reasons why they need to change this thing, but that one reason, fear of the unknown is a huge barrier. Absolutely right, Miranda. Fear of failure. That's one thing I didn't talk about when we were talking about relapsing and recycling. And we see this in the hospitals when people come in. A lot of shame and a lot of anger. It's what we say to ourselves when we don't succeed. When we did the darn and people were talking about the ability being one of the big anchor scores. Yeah, people don't want to quit smoking for a week and then say I failed. Don't see it as succeeding in quitting smoking for a week. They saw it as failing to quit smoking for the rest of their life. And that's not always realistic. Yep.
So let's look at preparation. I'm just going to play it from here. Again, listen for clues that this person is in the preparation stage.
I was able to get all my bills in order and have created a budget. Now I am ready to go to the bank to open a couple of different savings accounts so I can finally save up enough money to go to college. I can't believe I put this off for years, but I know saving money would make me feel more confident in the decision I made to go to college because I do not want all those student loans. I guess the next thing I need to do is to fill out that financial aid document and see how much money I would get from the school.
What did you hear? What did Doretha say that makes you think that she's in preparation? She's motivated and taking steps, planning and following through with parts of the plan. Yep. Motivated steps. I made a list of steps. She's making a plan. Some steps are being taken already. Getting everything in order, what she needs to do, but has not yet. Yes, I think that's a good summary, Linda, of preparation
It can be
stage.
tough. It can be tough to differentiate between preparation and action. And there is some overlap because in preparation, there may be some steps being taken. I kind of call it the, setting the stage for change. I joining the gym, but I haven't gotten there yet. But that is a preparatory step. Or the person that pours every drop of alcohol out of their house, they may not have started the actual sobriety yet, but and you hear it, and there's still some back and forth you can hear. There's still some of those elements of contemplation in there. But she also showed something that's pretty indicative. When people get into preparation, they gain energy. They're tired of being stuck. They're tired of being trapped there. You heard her say, I can't believe I waited this long.
Yeah.
There was
I
another.
like this. She created a blueprint, but maybe not considered barriers. She's ready
Mhm.
to engage with other people on her plan, the bank and the school, rather than buts, there was a plan.
Yeah, I think it was Sarah said a little bit ago that she has a client that is comfortable, too comfortable to change. And I mean, that's a great example. I I've fallen out of love with the word comfortable. When I was younger, I wanted to be comfortable. Now, when I think of comfortable, I think of that big, easy chair that once you get in, you can't get out of,
Mm.
and then nothing else happens. I don't know if anybody has one of those where you just sit down and the day's basically over at that point. And so there's a good to comfortable in that it's secure and consistent. And of course, where people have been, maybe they haven't had a lot of those things. But at another point, are you just ready to stay here? Is this going to be okay? I imagine, Joni, you see a lot of that in employment because you get somebody who is in the circle of hospitalizations and all that kind of stuff, and now they're out living in the world, and they're like, "Whoa, that's good enough. That's good
Mhm.
enough. I don't want to mess with this and end up losing what I've got."
Yeah.
And that's a logical place to go.
So let's look at action.
Students with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension.
But no, by all means.
I've been prepping my meals every week, healthy meals, and I've been trying to walk 3 times a day every day. It's been really tough, but I don't even know if it's helping. I mean, I have lost 5 pounds, so I guess it is helping.
So
So
what did you?
again, yep. What did you hear?
Yeah, the I guess part, because even the most positive change you can make in your life, there is some sort of pushback, right? There is going to be some, any behavior or habit that you have has some adaptive function. And it's very hard to catch that before the change process gets to that point. So you kind of have to plan for, like, what are we going to look out for?
Mhm.
And so you kind of see it. She's doing it. She's moving forward with it. She's seeing some benefit of it, but it's very tentative. The action stage is very, very tentative.
Mhm.
When I think of all the fantastic excuses I use to not go to the gym, to me that's like,
You can feel how unstable that change is, but she's moving and she needs support.
yep.
The action is challenging, but has to convince herself it's working. What do you see when you're working with people in your services that suggest action? What are people saying or doing that shows they're in the action stage? I know in employment services, people are filling out applications, people are putting in resumes, people with support, many times. Carly is mentioning they often look for validation to continue the action. Yes. And that's where maybe a lot of the affirmations can come in that we talked about when we were reviewing ORs. Allison,
Yep.
reflecting on results, celebrating. Yeah, absolutely. Celebrating those steps.
Absolutely.
Brian also does employment. I have people filling out applications, practicing interviewing. Lee's validate the baby steps as well as 2 steps forward, 1 step back is still progress. Attending appointments, gathering docs if needed, attending interviews, searching for housing or jobs, studying for driver's license, setting up appointments to take tests. Yes, all of that action
Yeah,
is
this
being
is
done.
probably the exception to the cheerleader for change thing, where there's no progress too small to not be called attention to and noticed.
Yes. Brian, researching the labor market information. Yes.
Yep.
Let's take a peek at maintenance.
Oh my gosh, I am so stressed out. I keep getting all these bills, and I'm not sure how I'm going to pay them. I know I haven't smoked a cigarette in over a year, but I really want one. I even went to the store to buy a pack today. But on the way there, I thought about the deep breathing that helped me quit, and I practiced for about 15 minutes. When I got to the store, I felt a little better, and I bought my favorite protein drink instead. I know it's been a while, and I know I can do this, but it's still so difficult some days.
So what did you hear there that differentiates maintenance from action? Because you heard little pieces of both, including a close call with a relapse or recycling, right? Yep. Acknowledging healthy coping skills, things that have worked before.
Yeah. Use tools to stay on track.
Mm-hmm.
Has built momentum, very realistic on how hard it can be, but experience using coping skills that she's used before, using her tools. Change has been consistently maintained, looked back on what has helped in the past. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And as practitioners, we can help remind people of what has helped in the past, what those tools are, help build that toolbox for people. If they're having a hard time, doing that on their own, we can support them in building that, utilizing the coping skills, recognizing her triggers.
Yep. Yep.
Support is a huge one we see a lot where I work. I have had participants say they fear doing better because those who support them won't be there. This can be addressed in their plans. What amount of continued support and encouragement do they need to continue to be successful? Developing support into their plan. Yes. Creating those plans with specific support needs addressed and identified. She didn't get down on herself, but bought a protein drink instead. So she kind of reoriented herself and did something that was still rewarded positive choice.
Yeah, she substituted, and a lot of addictions recovery is straight up substitution, substituting thoughts. It just takes a while because if somebody's been thinking and acting one way for a long time, that neural pathway is well set, and it just doesn't go away. Doesn't go away on one time. But yeah, and you can hear here where the support is, that she actually managed to, in the face of all the stress that she was dealing with, be able to hold out and do the right thing.
So let's look at recycle and relapse. We get to see Ken again in his film debut.
Yeah.
Over the last few sessions, PJ's been talking about how she would like to improve her wellness. She identified that she's not taking care of her physical and mental health wellness since taking on more responsibilities at work. She's also identified problems in her relationship with her significant other.
My friend keeps asking me why I'm not going to the gym anymore. I know it's been a long time. I missed a couple of days and I just couldn't get myself motivated to go back. And then I was embarrassed and I didn't want to be hassled about it. I don't even know why I need to keep going because it doesn't make me feel any better. I thought going to the gym and being around other people and working out was what I really needed to feel better about myself and my body. But at this point, I don't even know if going to the gym is even making a difference. Maybe I still feel a little out of shape and out of breath during the day, but I really don't think I need to exercise anymore.
So what did you hear there? Yeah. Excuses, right? Yep. Yep. Frustration. And it even, to me, it even echoes that stuck place of contemplation, which is why I think people naturally go back to that. You know, you get stuck in the change process and then it stops and then you're right back in that place of contemplation again.
She's
Yeah.
not getting her results, so she's questioning the change,
Mhm.
talking herself out of continuing the actions, frustration, self-motivation is hard, giving up.
Yep.
Coming up with reasons why she doesn't want to continue with the change.
And this is when you look at those interesting things like what kind of sustained talk are you getting? Because if the sustained talk feels like it's winning, then how do we adjust this blueprint for change to account for those things? I mean, you see this happen every year. We're just coming up on the time of year and where everybody goes to the gym for like 2 or 3 weeks. You know, and some people they're going in to lose weight and they may not lose weight right away, and then that's it. By week 2, week 3, it's all over. I think I saw a study where they said that half of all New Year's resolutions are done by January 9th.
Oh, that's so sad.
Well, it means you probably shouldn't plan
Discouraging,
your
yeah.
life changes when you're eating and drinking, but there's probably some other subtext in there as well.
So think about people that you work with. What are some relapse, recycle clues or indicators or talk that you hear?
Yep, it's not
Not
working.
working.
Very
Couldn't
often you
deal
hear
with it.
people talking badly about themselves as well.
Mhm.
They'll either blame the action that they're taking or they'll blame yourself. You know, this isn't working for me, and then right down from there.
I don't really have a problem
Mhm.
with, or I'm able to do this as long as they refer back to the barriers or perceived barriers.
Yep.
Great. So we're going to move into looking at some scenarios. Ken will talk a little bit about we're exploring some scenarios that we can apply, each of the stage that we just talked about, and then specifically talk about what types of strategies or techniques might be helpful to move that person beyond that stage. So while the continuum of change does not represent a linear process, like we said, it can be helpful to keep in mind when we're thinking about how to support someone in their change process, what is needed to support someone who is in pre-contemplation or contemplation as it relates to their target behavior. May be different than what is needed to support someone who might be in preparation or action. It's important to really get a sense of where they are in the continuum so that there's not a mismatch between what you're doing and where they are. A lot of times, practitioners approach people we're supporting as if they're all in preparation or action, guilty as charged. I mean, I've done that in my work as well. You know, we're so eager to help someone with a plan and get moving into, you know, looking for work and filling out applications for employment services that we assume that the person is ready to make that change, and we provide guidance and advice, set up meetings, activities, and we may feel frustrated. I know I did when the person doesn't follow through. We have to remember that people come to us at all places along this continuum, and we need to really listen to them to learn where they are, that we're using our MI spirit and skills to evoke motivation and change talk from them that will help move them closer to the change, to resolve ambivalence, and to reinforce any change that they've already begun to make.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to me about figuring out what stage of change someone is in, and we didn't talk about this very much. Usually, we'll talk about this when people have multiple issues. How do you pick where to start? because of course the temptation is for us to decide where we're starting. Here's what I think is most important. And that's not necessarily the case. That's not the right way. But the other thing I think about is it's sort of your entry point into that person, where they say, this is how I feel about this particular change. And that becomes where you start from, and again, I use that analogy where, okay, it's a diagnosis, but you're diagnosing readiness for change more than you're diagnosing a constellation of symptoms. And that might be more helpful for the kind of work that you do anyway, because you're trying to get somebody to move forward in a particular area, whether it's housing or employment or, whatever. So let's start out with the first vignette, and I'll read it and then I'll ask you a couple of questions and see what you think about it. But the description's up there so you can read it as well. So Isaiah has recently been fired from his job. He's very angry about that. He's worked for a number of years and he feels like he was terminated for no cause. He blames his coworkers for his termination from this job and several jobs before this one. He doesn't want to work on his resume or provide any information about his previous employment. He's not open to talking about his history of getting terminated and the behaviors that have contributed to his getting fired. So what stage does this sound like to you? And what makes you, how did you come to that conclusion?
What's Isaiah's focus or goal for change?
Yep. So I'm seeing some pre-contemplation.
Pre-contemplation, yep.
Yep. Blaming others, not willing to act. I don't even want to talk about it. So I have this problem, but I don't want to talk about it. That's usually a good sign.
Blaming.
That's usually a good sign of pre-contemplation. And just as another detailed point, and you might catch me getting this wrong because I've been doing this for a long time, I don't want to refer to Isaiah as a pre-contemplator. I don't want to identify that with him. I would say he is in pre-contemplation about his recent loss of his job and perhaps loss of several jobs, because the stage of change is regarding a specific thing. He's probably in other stages regarding other things, and I don't want it to be as much of a label. Somebody might say, oh, they're a pre-contemplator, or they're resistant, or they're treatment resistant. We use all these little labels. And sometimes what it does is it backs us off from reaching out to that person. It's a kind of a doorway to blaming somebody.
So let's think about the strategies that we've talked about over the last few sessions, what we talked about earlier today, what you know about change and helping people kind of move in the direction of their goals, which for Isaiah, the goal seems to be getting a new job. What motivational strategies would you use to support Isaiah with making a change? I wouldn't really know what his actual stage was around looking for new work until we had a chance to explore his frustration around his last job. He might be ready for action once he's had a chance to talk about it. Yes, that's exactly right, Allison. We really need to ask a few more questions to know what the actual target behavior or target change is. Please reflect perception of his thoughts and feelings. Absolutely.
Yep. Because usually what happens with people in pre-contemplation is they have another story for why what happened. And the difference between what their story is and what we may think the story is something we're going to have to get through. We're going to have to figure that out at some point, because if we just say, well, look, Isaiah, you keep getting kicked out of these jobs for the same things over and over again, he doesn't see it that way, and we're not going to be moving anywhere forward. Now, maybe at some point we could say, look, are there any similarities? Did you notice any connections between these jobs and what happened? Do you get the feeling this is like the same thing happening over and over again?
Looking at the recycle part, why does it keep continuing, getting through to the root cause?
Sure.
Showing empathy.
That's very good. So you don't want to come right out and say, well, Isaiah, you're the problem. That's what's going on here. No, that's not going to get us anywhere. And unfortunately, that happens a lot, in maybe not so many words. But instead, if we can work with and keep him talking about that. Like one of the interventions with people in pre-contemplation is get them talking and get that full cover story. You're developing a relationship with that person, and you're also learning where they're at, where they're stuck. or what is that thing that is so unacceptable, that they just can't see it that way. There's something very charged there, because it's
I
not
love,
accidental. It's not that they don't know. Wherever you
I
go, they
like,
absolutely.
yeah, yep. Kind of let them know that you're there to support them.
Hmm.
Use the darn, absolutely, to gauge and orient him. Use the darn, the darn ruler we talked about, kind of get a sense for his desire, ability, reason to change, and his need to change. Can also focus on building that therapeutic relationship, just like you all mentioned in the chat, spending some time building rapport, building his trust, using open-ended questions, right? To someone mentioned, to better understand his experiences and try to elicit Isaiah's perception of the problem.
Right.
Using reflections and affirmations to let Isaiah know that you understand his perspective.
Even with most people that are in the pre-contemplation stage, there's usually that this is the whole idea about ambivalence versus, say, resistance or denial, where part of them knows.
Mm-hmm.
They know, but they don't want to know. I mean, and maybe there's a part where you can relate to that. If there's something in your life that you had a problem somewhere and you didn't really want to hear about it, you had other things going on, you didn't want to be bothered, so maybe you weren't so receptive to it. And then at some point, something changed. It either just kept showing up, or someone that you care close to you brought it to your attention, or very often what happens is it gets worse. You can imagine Isaiah might be able to work this angle if he's lost 2 or 3 jobs. He gets to 6, 7, or 8. At a certain point, it's like, well, why does this keep happening? And maybe not that the goal is to put Isaiah to blame for it, but just to say, how can you roll with this? How can you work with this so that you're not stuck in the same situation over and over again? So yeah, pretty straightforward in pre-contemplation with him. And again, he's probably used to people saying other things and being critical of him, and then that repeats the pattern. All right, so that was good. Now let's see, what do we have next? Nia has been concerned about improving her blood sugar, as her doctor recently suggested that her numbers were high. The doctors recommended a few choices: weight loss, medications, diet, and exercise, or she may end up needing to go on injectable insulin. She's begun talking to her support worker about going back to the gym. She has a gym membership, but consistently finds reasons not to go. She's either too tired, too busy, has no way of getting there. Nia could ask me for a whole bunch of other excuses, because I've got at least 100 more than that. However, she's been cooking healthier meals recently. So what does she sound like? Where do you think she is on the continuum?
Contemplation and preparation, action.
And there may be different behaviors going on that may be at different stages.
Contemplation. So she has a gym membership, right? So that suggests that she's at least in preparation. However, her consistent reasoning to not go to the gym suggests that she may be closer to contemplation, right? So in terms of cooking healthier meals, it seems that Nia, it might be in the action stage. So I guess all that to say is everyone was right.
Well, again, also, and I heard some of you said
Yeah,
this,
there's some action there.
there are different behaviors. She can be in an action stage regarding cooking healthier meals. She may be at this preparation, drifting back into contemplation about the gym. So she may be in different places, and they may be either in between stages, or they may be in motion. And again, what you want to do in a situation like that, again, you always want to have give positive credit for what they're doing. So the whole idea of making the meals thing happen is great. And then also sort of address the things that are stopping these other pieces from happening. Because these are all, nothing that is being said here is too out of the ordinary. Too tired, too busy. That's fairly typical for anybody. So that's part of this whole diagnostic process. You might have to write down a couple different behaviors, because I'm sure most of your clients probably have multiple diagnoses, and I'm sure they have multiple things that they're trying to work on. And usually what they recommend is you address the one that they're the furthest along on, the one that they're most ready to move on.
Mhm.
So that would be an argument for, because you might be thinking right off the bat, oh, well, let's start working on this gym thing. Let's get on that, because that seems like that's a problem. Well, she's actually furthest along with the meals. So do we want to check in with that first? I mean, obviously we want to check in with her and see what she wants to work on. But even that, where, okay, can we move the eating piece forward? And maybe, because even while you're working on another behavior, you're still doing work on that other behavior as well. You're always addressing the whole in those parts. So let's see, what else did she say? Yeah, so you can see the elements of different stages in here.
What about motivational strategies with Nia?
Mm-hmm.
With making this change? What motivational strategies would you use to support Nia?
Yep. Yep, definitely
Affirmations.
affirm the progress that she's already made. Build
Love
on
this, build on her wins.
Yep.
Affirmations and praise for the healthy eating, affirmations. Maybe asking about barriers or any obstacles that might be getting in the way and how they could best be addressed. Asking Nia what has worked in the past, right? Since this is something she's previously had success with, this could be a time to strengthen that change plan. Anything else here in the open-ended questions about how she's made changes to her diet already? Absolutely affirm her progress, focus on the parts of the goal she has met. Connect the affirmation / celebration of healthy eating to tackling doubts around exercising. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also probably not a bad idea to go back and look at the things that were motivating her in the first place. If her primary motivation was her appearance, I'm just making that up, that wasn't written down there. That's different than if her primary motivation is not to be on injectable medication, and so part of this is plugging into, we could say those are both good reasons, but the one that matters to me is the one that we really want to pay, attention to.
Reward steps taken, continued encouragement, goal setting, addressing barriers.
Sure.
What resources can she utilize at home or in her neighborhood? Things you don't have to travel for, easier to access. Yep.
Another piece is there, just in this particular case, sometimes our beliefs, this is the CBT part of this whole thing, where what you believe, she might be doing herself a better service by eating healthier than necessarily the gym if her primary motivation is to get her glucose or her A1C down. So if she is coming from this place where I have to work out and I have to eat better, well, you know what? If you just want to get one of those where you want it to be, get that to a place of maintenance where you got it, and then we'll come back and go to the next one. Because what you don't want to have it do is lose all the progress. As this gym thing and this healthy eating thing isn't working, and you go right back to contemplation again. So plugging back into what is their primary motivation? Okay, third and last vignette. Alex really wants to improve their overall wellness. Alex has recently started using the patch and has reduced their smoking from a pack a day to 5 cigarettes a day. Alex has also been considering starting a meditation practice, but isn't sure how to use it. Also, Alex has thought about starting a feelings journal, but doesn't really think it will help. All right, so we got a couple different things going on here. So the diagnosis here of readiness to change, we have a couple different things going on here. I see smoking. I mean, the overall goal is overall wellness, but the pieces underneath that are what looks like smoking reduction, meditation, feelings journal, and they are in different places regarding each of those things. So again, what do you see as far as the stages of these different things? See action. Yep. Action and contemplation. there's some doubt regarding that feelings journal. We got some work to do there. I don't know. Depending on where that's going with Alex, we may, again, I would try to start with where that person is furthest along. One of the questions that I was wondering about was 5 cigarettes a day the goal, or was that a step along the way? Was somebody really trying to stop something, or is that okay? Trying to figure out what stage that person's in. Are they on their way to their goal, or have they accomplished it for a period of time? And then the meditation practice isn't sure how. And then the feelings journal doesn't really think it would help. Those verbs kind of tell you where that person is. And again, I would start with the success. If you could put quitting smoking in a bottle and sell it, you'd be doing very well. So even getting down to 5, from a pack is serious progress. And
preparation with wanting to reduce smoking, some action with use of patches.
Yep. Yeah. So, where is this? Is the goal 0 cigarettes? Where are we at with that? Start with that, but then also look at some of these other things as well. If Alex wants to move forward on the meditation practice and the feelings journal, what would the next step be? How would we address that? And of course, that other piece, a person has multiple change initiatives, they are interrelated. I can't help but think if Alex gets better at meditating or gets the feelings journal going, then that may help them with smoking reduction or cessation. Again, I'm not sure what the goal was. Yep, reminding of past progress, right.
Yes.
Nothing too small to acknowledge. And that's not small. Going from a pack to 5 is no joke.
Making sure they feel prepared and have tools needed. Yeah. Focus on the progress.
One of the interventions that they talk about in stages of change is raising awareness. Someone might not know what the benefits of these things are. So if Alex is unclear of what the benefits of a feelings journal are, where's your motivation to do something if you don't know what the benefits are of it? So sometimes that's you've heard me say a lot about not trying to persuade people to doing something that they're not willing to do. But when somebody's in this position where I don't know if it'll work, that's a time to provide information. Clarify actual goal. Yes. Ask permission to explore options of self-support getting there. Focus on the process. Yep.
Yeah, like Ken said, offer to answer any questions that they may have about meditation. That might help address anything that they're considering. Focus on why they are quitting.
And that's a fun thing to practice. I mean, that's something, if you're familiar with, that's something that can be built into session or the time that you actually work with. That becomes, a trial run at that stuff.
Discuss fears around meditation and journaling.
Yeah. Did they try it before? Was it unsuccessful?
I would share something about what worked for me and offer options on things that might work for them and ask, what can you think of that might help? Yes, that nice, Jacqueline.
That's a great example. One thing that I love to do is before giving advice, I ask first just to see if there's anybody home. So if you ask something like, hey, I was working with somebody who was in a situation similar to yours. Would you like to hear about what helped them? You already know from the look on their face if it's no sale or not. So save the story, if they're not feeling it. Or you've planted the seed, and maybe they'll come back to you at some other point for it. But what you're not doing is giving them a story when they're really not hearing it. Save you the trouble there. But I love that idea, even if it's me, even if it's like I used a feeling journal. I was working with somebody and they had a feeling journal, and this is what it helped with, So what I hope we've gotten across here is, again, since stages of change and motivational interviewing are not the same thing, They work very well together. For me, stages of change is, again, diagnosing where that person is and starting the process of mapping out what a change plan would look like, and or addressing and finding out what the barriers are. Why is that person why hasn't this change happened yet? Answering that question gives you a little hint about where they are in the stage. And then that's where you line up the spirit of motivational interviewing, which I heard a lot of that in the comments that came up in the chat, where we pull up alongside with them and walk beside them instead of saying, oh, we should go here, we should do that, go here. Or, oh, no, that's not going to work, don't do that. Being far less directive and walking with. And then these tools like OARS and like DARN to be able to help them on their way. Those are the actual pieces and the tools that you use in session to help someone, move in that direction. The key thing for me is, and I don't want to tell you how much I've struggled with this over the years, the need to slow down, listen more, and have the person drive the change process. Because I fancy myself a genius, I automatically have the right idea and the perfect response. I hope the sarcasm is duly noted. I think I can make all these things happen. And it was a real shift for me to kind of take a back seat to a certain degree and say, well, let's let this, what does their change process look like for them? Where are they with it? And then how can I partner up what I know, technique-wise and otherwise? They're the experts in their life. So how can I put these two things together? And that's where the energy for change comes from. So some of the major points from today, and I like 1 and 6 right here. In fact, I'm going to start with 6. Change is not easy. And we don't have to go any further than having you think about a big change you made in your life. And what did it take to make it happen? And how many attempts did it take to make it happen? And are you still vigilant because you know that can be undone, much easier than it was done? So motivational interviewing is a collaborative approach for change. It's a team. Nobody gets in between the team. They really, if anything, take a leadership role because they are the experts in their life. And it becomes our job to help translate these tools into actions and supports that's going to help that person. We have to fight our own writing reflex. We are all good people. We like to help people. It makes us feel better about ourselves. We're probably getting no small amount of pressure from our jobs to make these things happen. But just like giving advice, we have to sit back on that a little bit and be more supportive and more of a partner than, say, a leader. Keeping the 4 processes as the foundation, the whole idea that you're evoking and compassion and acceptance and all that stuff, and that you start with building that relationship before you start to focus down into what the thing is we're actually going to change. The OARS are the standard tools for that. And I mentioned it, I believe, last time. I was always a fan whenever I took written notes of a conversation with somebody. I always wrote OARS in the margin just to remind me, did I get all 4 of those in? Because I'd forget. You get in the flow of what you're doing and you forget, especially if you're in a hurry. But I would write OARS down the left-hand margin. And then I was always looking like, all right, where can I get that in? Where can I get that in? I was always waiting. It's a little robotic at first, which I think some of you said. It's a little hard to go into the deep water of this, but with practice, it gets easier. And then after a while, you don't even realize you're doing it. And I think that's really where the benefit comes in. So questions, any questions from anybody?
And before, think about some questions, and we certainly have time to answer them, but as you're thinking, I do want to just remind you of the upcoming learning communities again, starting in January on the 28th. I think Ken mentioned 9 to 10, and then they go through and they're listed here. You should be getting an email blast from HCA, the Healthcare Authority, with all of this information on how to register. They're an hour long, so we'll spend that time in breakout sessions and really applying and practicing what we are focusing on for that particular month. We do have a topic for each of those months. So embodying the spirit is in January, helping someone focus on their change goals, recognizing and reinforcing change talk. We're going to have 2 sessions on practicing OARS, but I imagine that practice will be sprinkled throughout some of the other sessions. And then in June, recognizing stage of change. And so each of our each of the sessions will have these kind of overarching topics, but we'll be practicing and really kind of drilling down these areas so that you can leave the learning community in 6 months with some applied practice using motivational interviewing.
Yeah, it's really meant to parallel how we covered the material here, but with much more, well, I shouldn't say much more of your input. There was plenty of input in these sessions, but even more so there, like when you get to specific barriers, where it's either you're not comfortable with the tool or you get in a situation where it doesn't appear to be working or helping and just need some pointers on that. So,
yes, you will be receiving the PowerPoint presentation and the videos. I don't know about certificates. I don't believe, but I don't want to say that for sure. I think someone from the healthcare authority would better be able to answer that. I know we don't provide certificates from our end. I do see a couple of questions in here.
yeah, and they sort of overlap, and it's back to something we talked about before, where very often they throw the control back to you. They don't want to. It's either they're used to being powerless, or that's just their way out of it, is just to put it back to you. And again, I think the number one goal for that is evocation. You just want to go back into them and ask questions and let them take the lead in most of the conversations. Even if you say, well, I'm more curious about what you think about this. You're the expert in this. You know more about your life than I do. So I'm anxious to hear about you and what you think and what you think is going on. I could definitely see that happening with teenagers. And when we've had these homework assignments where people have done the MI interactions with their teenage kids, there's usually been a pretty good positive result from that, because the control thing is a big issue there. So the idea that you're listening to what they have to say, what they think, what they do, doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that you're going to hear them out is a big piece.
Lori made a good point in the chat. Great information and help when talking with all people, not just clients. Yes, I mean, I think we were trying to really reinforce that change is universal, and everyone that we meet in our lives might be going through a change, and using these concepts and techniques is certainly helpful for many people we interact with, coworkers, supervisors, supervisees. So prep for the learning community. I want to make sure we get to this before our time is up here. Think about a challenge or a success that you've had embodying the spirit of MI. Since we're going to focus our topic on for the January call on really embodying the spirit of MI, think about a time that you've had success or challenge, really kind of partnering with someone and having that compassion. What do you think contributed to the success, and what do you think may have helped to address that challenge? And we'll have a discussion on that. But again, depending on how the call in January goes, we might focus on some, the group might have other more emerging matters that we can discuss.
But definitely bring the successes and bring the challenges, and we'll talk about all of them. We'll talk about what worked, and we'll talk about what other ways that you can. Again, like anything else, you don't just walk in the room and this cures everything. In fact, a lot of you, I'm sure, have done different versions of this. You may not. This is just a way of organizing information, I think, more than it's something brand new. But it's the knowing that you're doing it, I think, is the key to it.
Yes, Lori mentioned I've used this motivational interviewing on my 5-year-old.
Year-old.
I have a 19-year-old and 21-year-old, and used it as well. So I put the survey link here in the chat, and also the QR code. We would love your feedback. And I think on the survey, they ask topics that you'd be interested in, or if you have further questions. So please let us know. And again, we've got the learning communities coming up. Would love for you to join us for that, so we can really apply much of what we've been learning.
Yeah, I think of the populations that I've seen that have done the best with motivational interviewing, people with addictions, adolescents, and then also the people that are severely and persistently mentally ill who have been in the system for a long time. You're their 27th case manager or your 10th social worker or whatever, and you're just They just go through the system, and the idea that instead of being dictated to, their feedback is critical, it's their life and it's their change process, and that we respect that. I think that speaks volumes.
Just to remind everyone that this was part of the DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority, and you'll receive all of the information at some point. Hopefully that'll be coming your way, or you did receive it. If not, I put my email in the chat. So thank you everyone for all of your great interaction. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. You made it a lot of fun.
Hope to see you in January. Bye, everyone.
Take care. And happy holidays.